My intention, as we started a couple of weeks ago, is to talk about the names of God, because I think it's important that in this season, the season that we're dealing with right now, that we remember who God is, what God is, and what God is done for us already. That I think when we lose sight of what God has done and lose sight of who God is, it leads to us buying into the fear and the paranoia that is going on in the culture. That while we're paying attention to the news and while we're paying attention to all that is going on, at the same time, my trust is in God. Do I got 5 people tonight on the feed that my trust is in God? And so we started on a Sunday, sermonically, we preached about the God that heals us. Last week, we talked about Jehovah Jireh, God is my provider. And my intention was to talk tonight about Jehovah Nisi. Jehovah Nisi. Um, the Lord is my banner in victory, some say. Um, but I feel God pushing me in a different direction. And so tonight I know we texted out that we were going to talk about Jehovah Nisi. Um, we're going to talk about Jehovah Nisi next week. This week, I want to draw our attention um, to one of the lesser known names of God, but I think it is so significant. And today, that name was speaking to me. Today, that name was speaking to me. Um, and I know we're not really going in order of appearance in the Bible. We're not going alphabetically. But believe me, I did have a whole system in my mind. But I've heard it often said that if you want to make God laugh, tell him what your plans are. So tonight, um, I want to talk. I want to talk about Roi. El Roi, the God who sees. El Roi, the God who sees. To get the background of this, we're going to be discussing the prophet Abraham. Abraham is so significant in the life of the church and the belief of the church. It's located there in the book of Genesis, his life story. Um, number one, I love the book of Genesis. Genesis is without question my favorite book of the Bible, followed by Romans. I love Genesis because so many of the things that you need to understand for the rest of the Bible are located in Genesis, particularly when we study the life of Abraham. So much of his life, um, um, there's so much in his life that we can learn from. There's so much tension in his life, and so I believe that tonight this is going to bless you. If you could do me a favor, could you like this video? Could you share this video? Could you tag someone that you think might be blessed by this video tonight? This Bible study. We're going to be talking about El Roi, the God who sees. The God who sees. Amen. Abram, as he was initially called until God changed his name, found favor with God. He was favored by God, although he did nothing to earn that favor. I wish I had some help right there. That God favors us despite us. That's why I played that song tonight, because he looks beyond our faults and he still sees to our needs. Abram is called a friend of God. He's the first person that is described as a friend of God. Understand how unequal their friendship is. That Abram is just a man, but yet God, Jehovah, is everything. And that's why last week we talked about how Abraham declares that he is my provider. He has provided everything that I needed. Yeah. And there's nothing that Abraham can give God that God doesn't already have, but yet he calls Abraham his friend. Listen, at the end of the day, I don't want to be known as a great preacher. I don't want to be known as the world's best pastor. I don't need to be president of some straight national convention. I'd rather just be called God's friend. Here it is. He's called God's friend. And there was a patriarchy that if we're going to talk about this, we got to deal with it. There's a patriarchy that exists that, in other words, in order to be considered blessed by God, no matter what material possessions you had to have a boy child. You had to have a boy child, the promised child, if you will. The boy child was so very important, that so much so that women that could not have children oftentimes were murdered. I'm telling you what happened. And even now in our culture, although we don't murder barren women, there's a tendency to mistreat women who don't have a husband or don't have any children. There's a tendency to look down on those as if they're somehow less than those that have children and have a husband. Abraham is called a blessed man. God tells him he's going to have a son. Matter of fact, he tells him that his descendants will be so numerous, they'll be as grains of sand on the beach. This is the promise of God to Abram. And the problem is, God takes his sweet old time about coming through and fulfilling the promise. In the meantime, God is still blessing him and still keeping him. But there's one thing he desires from God that he does not have. I don't know if you've ever been there, where you've desired one thing from the Lord. This one thing have I asked for. This one thing that I have desired, and yet I still don't have it. I prayed, and I still don't have it. I fasted, and God still didn't do it. I prayed, and it didn't happen. Finally, Abram and his wife, specifically his wife, they get anxious. Genesis chapter 16, please follow along with me. The New King James reads, starting at verse number 1, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar." Sarah, Abram's wife, bore him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarah says to Abram, not to Hagar, to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, and perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarah. This text is problematic, particularly in light of today's lens. Abram is considered a blessed man, He has a wife. She cannot have children. And she has an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. The tension in this first verse for me is that they have a servant. I want you to drop that maid part. They have a servant. Dare I say they have a slave. And Abram and his wife have a conversation about having a baby with the slave, but she's not included in the conversation. Imagine how Hagar must feel. I'm guilty of this myself. When I tell this story, I tell this story from the perspective of Abraham. That here it is, his wife comes to him and does something I don't know any wife that would do, and says, listen here, I want you to sleep with this woman and have a baby to fulfill the promise of God. Notice it's Sarah's idea, not Abram's. But Abram go along with it, right? He's excited. But nobody talked to Hagar. Nobody asked Hagar, did she want to be involved in this situation? Nobody asked Hagar how she feels about this situation. Nobody asked Hagar, do you want to be the surrogate for this family? Normally in today's times, when you're a surrogate, there's some sort of compensation that goes along. There's no compensation. They have a conversation about Hagar, but she's not included in the conversation. Are y'all all right? Because I don't see anybody commenting. I don't see anybody commenting. I need y'all to comment. Are y'all okay? And so the text says, Abraham heeded the voice of Hagar. Then Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband to be his wife after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. He went into Hagar and she conceived. And here's the problem. When she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. See the tension. See the tension. Abram is in a strange land because God has literally told him, I'm going to bless you, but in order to get your blessing, you have to leave your people. Your people are going to block you from this blessing. That's a whole sermon right there. So you got to leave your people. You got to get away from your people, from your circle. You got to get away from them people, and I'm going to bless you. I'm not going to tell you where to go. I want you to just start walking. And when you get to the place that I want you to be, I'll tell you when to stop. This was dangerous to leave your neighborhood, your area, your territory, and just start walking in the other territories with neighborhoods of folk that don't know you, and you're blessed. Abraham has wealth as he's traveling. Abraham has jewels as he's traveling. Abraham has livestock as he's traveling. And Abraham has what the people found out. The people described his wife as being fine. So fine that at one point Abraham lied and said, she's not my wife, she's my sister, because she was scared they would kill him and take his wife. See the tension? He's in a strange land, but along the way, he's taken a servant named Hagar. She's Egyptian. The text keeps telling us this over and over and over again, that she is Egyptian. I'm driving this point home to stress the fact that y'all may not like this, but she is without doubt African, with African features. She is a black woman. She's been taken as a servant, taken away from her homeland, just like Abram, just like Sarah, who've left everything that they know, and now she's out there and she's being mistreated. See the tension? And as much as I want to blame Abraham, and there's plenty of blame for him, the text says her problem is with her mistress, Sarah. Could it be that she expected more out of Sarah because she's a woman? Could it be that she expected Sarah to know how she felt? Could it be that she expected Sarah to be nicer to her, to be kinder to her? Could it be that she didn't expect this drama from Sarah? Because after all, verse 1 said this was Sarah's idea. But yet Sarah didn't talk to her. She's in a strange land. She just wanted to be the servant. She really didn't want to be that. She wanted to be free. She's been forced into a sexual relationship with Abram. And now Sarah has got new on her. Sarah's got new on her because Sarah is much significantly older than Hagar is. And she's afraid that Abram is going to catch feelings for this younger, prettier woman who gave him the one thing that I couldn't give him. All of this happens because they refuse to wait on God. Sarah says to Abram in verse number 5, my wrong be upon you. Yeah. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she became despised. I became despised in her eyes, so the Lord judged between you and me. She says, this is what she says. She says, Abram, I know I was wrong, but you the man. You the head. My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she says, I became despised in her eyes. Because they refused to wait on God. And she says, the emphasis here is, I don't like how she acted, Abram. You know, she got your baby. She don't want to clean my toilet no more. She having your baby. She don't want to run my bath water no more. She having my baby. She acting new. I simply submit to you, the problem here is Sarah. That Sarah feels insecure and threatened, and because of that, she starts throwing off her issue on Hagar. Have you ever met anybody? Oh, I see y'all in the feed now. Have you ever met anybody that made a mistake, and instead of taking ownership for the mistake that they made, they blamed everybody else for what they had done wrong? Here it is. She's blaming Abram and she's blaming Hagar. When Hagar didn't have a say in this situation to start off with, nobody asked her how she felt. The text doesn't tell us that Hagar said, sure, I'd love to be. No. And she is blaming her husband and the jump off for a situation she created. Verse 5. Abram says to Sarah, indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do with her as you please. I got what I wanted. Yeah. I got what I wanted. I'm good. I've slept with her. She pregnant. Hey, I'm good. Look, do what you want to do. Do what you want to do. And the end of verse 6 says, and when Sarai dealt harshly with her, that Sarah decides, I need to let her know that you may have had him once, but I got him all the time. She decides, I'm gonna let you know who's in control of this situation. I'm gonna let you know. Here's what triggered me about this. And y'all may not go here with me, but here's what triggered me about this. When I read a text, I try to visualize the text. I try to see it in my mind like a movie. And in the movie of my mind, I see Sarah weaponizing her tears and crying. She's wrong, but I'm going to blame the man, and I'm going to blame this black woman. That's what I see. I see her weaponizing her tears. Weaponizing her tears like a woman walking a dog in the park with no leash. And when a black man corrects her, she starts crying and calls the police. And then when she's called out for her racism, she says, y'all are destroying my life. But in her calling the police, that man could have lost his life over whether or not she had a dog on a leash. I see her weaponizing her tears. Like the woman that accused Emmett Till of raping her. Of whistling at her when he had done no such thing. And he loses his life. I see her weaponizing her tears like a woman that called the police on a young girl that was selling lemonade without a license from the city. I see her weaponizing her tears to justify what she's going to do to this woman to treat her harshly. I see her weaponizing her tears. I'm wrong, but I'm not accepting the wrong by myself. I'm going to pass the blame on everybody else. She weaponizes her tears like a woman that sees the black folk at a cookout and calls the police. I humbly submit to you that Sarah is caring, that Sarah's a bully. And because Sarah's position feels threatened, she mistreats the African sister. Blame don't stop with her. Blame don't stop with her. Abram had a chance as the man. She came to Abram. He had a chance as man to put an end to this and say, no, you know what? We was wrong. I shouldn't have slept with her. I shouldn't have took her. Because although the text calls her wife, she doesn't have wife privileges. See it for yourself. She's still a servant. If I'm the wife, how am I still a servant? He had a chance to set this in order. He had a chance to put this in place. And Abram fails as man to cover either woman. He fails as man to call either woman into correction. He fails as man to stand up for his unborn son. He fails as man, as husband, and as soon-to-be father. He failed. And he says, I'm washing my hands. I don't want nothing to do with this. I want the sex, but I don't want the responsibility. I want the pleasure, but I don't want the responsibility. I could go further, but I'm gonna stay right there. He says, I want the goodies, but I ain't defending either one of y'all. See the problem? And so Sarah and Hagar, at the end of verse 6, she fled from the presence of Sarah because she was tired of the way Sarah was treating her. She was tired of the way Sarah was abusing her authority. She was tired of Sarah weaponizing her tears. Oh, I wish I could preach this like I feel it, but we just teaching today. Verse 7. In verse 6, the end of verse 6, she flees from the presence of Sarai. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in where? In the wilderness, by the spring on the way to shore. I'm going to say it again. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness. I'm going to say it again. The angel of the Lord found her while she was in the wilderness. Turner, if I've taught you nothing else, that whenever you see the wilderness, it represents a place of separation. Whenever you see wilderness, it represents a place of confusion. Whenever you see wilderness, you have to recognize that whoever's in the wilderness is having a bad day. Who's ever in the wilderness, they are having a problem. Nobody goes to the wilderness to be happy. When you see wilderness, there's a problem. She is confused. She is lost. She's in the wilderness. And the angel of the Lord found her. Somebody ought to thank God right there. I know I'm not preaching. I'm just teaching. But somebody ought to thank God that when you were lost in the wilderness, God found you. When you were confused, God found you. When you didn't know what you were going to do, God found you. Do I got 5 people on the feed? I'm just teaching tonight. I'm not preaching. Do I got 5 people on the feed that can just thank God that when I was lost and outside of my right mind in the wilderness, God found me? The wilderness is more than just a physical place. You can be lost in the wilderness of your mind. You can be in the wilderness in your marriage. You can be in the wilderness with your children. Is there anybody that can admit, I've been in the wilderness and God found me in the wilderness? She's in the wilderness and God found her. She's in the wilderness. The angel of the Lord found her. Verse number 8. Hagar, Sarah's maid. Where you come from? Where you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarah. Okay. Angel asked her, where you coming from? And more importantly, where you going? Where you coming from? Where you going? Sarah says, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarah. But she doesn't say where she's going because she don't know. Have you ever been there where you just knew you had to get out of the situation? You didn't know where you was going to go. But I know if I don't get out of here, there's going to be a problem. If I don't get out of here, this furniture going to get to moving. If I don't get out of here, somebody going to get hands laid on it. If I don't get out of here, I don't even know where I'm going, but I've got to get out of here. And she gets out and the angel asks her, where you going? And she says, I don't know. Here is the most problematic verse in this chapter to me. This is problematic for me on so many levels. The tension in this text, one verse right here, is what has had me scared to preach or teach this text my whole ministry. This is the problem. Verse 9. The angel of the Lord says to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. I'm sorry, what? Now, I just told you I'm running from her because she ain't treated me right. I just told you that there's drama back there. I told you, God, you see everything. God, how is it that you know how they've treated me? You know that man slept with me and did not get consent. You know that they had a conversation about me and didn't include me in the conversation. You know that Sarah has gotten new on me and has been treating me harshly. You know that Abraham no longer wants to be a father. He wants to be a baby daddy. And he was there to make the baby, but he ain't finna do nothing to take care. You know all of that. How is it that you can tell me to go back there knowing how I've been mistreated? Has God ever asked you to stay in a place where it was hurting you? Why would a loving God send this woman back to an abusive relationship? Why would God send this woman back to the place of her pain? Why would God send this woman back just so she could be mistreated some more? As pastor, hear me clearly. I have never told any abused woman to stay in that relationship. And I know that there are those who say pastors should never advocate divorce. But if he putting his hands on you, or you putting his hands on him, I firmly counsel you, y'all need to get divorced. And I sleep well that night, knowing that I've said the right thing. I don't believe it is the will of God for us to stay in abusive relationships. She is being treated harshly. That's what the Bible says. We're not given insight into what that harshly means. Maybe it was mental abuse. Maybe it was physical abuse. Maybe it was sexual abuse. We don't know. We just know it was harsh treatment, and it was so bad that she said, I'd rather leave here by myself, a pregnant, defenseless woman, and take my chance in the wilderness with lions, tigers, bears, and wilderness people than stay here in this house. But God says something. He answers my question as to why God would send her back. The angel says to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted as a multitude. I'm not done, because I ain't telling you just to go back for the sake of the child. But look what he says. The angel said to her, behold, you are with child. You shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. And here go my shout. Here go my shout. Because the Lord has heard your affliction. I'm going to say that again. You shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. Can we stop right there? And we talk about when God hears our faintest cry. What's the songwriter say? He hears our faintest cry, and he'll do what? He'll answer by and by. To be honest with you, I still don't have the full answer for this. I don't know why God sends her back. I confess, I don't have all the answers to this. What I do know is God is telling her, I have heard your affliction. I have heard your pain. I have heard what you're going through. And I am a witness. When God hears about your affliction, God intervenes in your life. There is no promise here that suddenly Sarah gonna get nice again. There's no promise of that. There is no promise of what's gonna happen that all of a sudden all three of y'all gonna get along and y'all all gonna be equal at the table. There's no promises of that. But what God says is, I have heard your affliction. I heard about what you're going through. I have heard about it, and God is blessing her with the strength to make it through this. God is blessing her with the strength to keep going through this. God is blessing her with the ability to endure this, catch this, for a season. A season. Verse 12, he'll be like a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand will against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all of his brethren. That's right. God is up to something that not even she can see. God is up to something that speaks beyond her. God is up to something that she's not even aware of. What got me wanting to teach this is the frustration of another black man murdered today. What got me wanting to teach this was the frustration of them kicking Colin Kaepernick out of the league for kneeling. And yet, this police officer kneeled on a black man's neck for 8 minutes till he died. What got me wanting to preach this is the history of systemic racism in this country. But I came to remind us and encourage us that God heard about our affliction. God heard about what we're going through. And not only has God heard about it, but God gonna do something about it. Yeah. Verse 13 says, and this is significant to me. Usually when we talk about the names of God are revealed by men. Abraham said, I'm going to name this place Jehovah Jireh because God has provided. Abraham, patriarch. Moses names the place where the God healed the bitter water. He names it Jehovah Rophi, the God that heals me. Other names are revealed. David calls him Jehovah Shalom. The Lord is my peace. And he also reveals him to be Jehovah Shishkenu. The Lord is present with me. But here it is, a black African slave woman in verse 13. Then the black African slave woman who had been raped and mistreated, she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. For she said, have I also here seen him Yes? Yeah? Yeah? Hello? Yeah, I'm in the middle of teaching. I'm sorry about that. Somebody interrupted the conference call. I apologize. She names the place. You are the God who sees. This African black slave woman named the place. You are the God who sees. For she said, have I also seen him who sees me? Here's her revelation. God sees her. God did not see her as a potential surrogate to have a baby. God saw her. God didn't see her as just a slave. God saw her. God didn't see her as being inferior to Sarah. He saw her. God didn't see her the way Abraham saw her as someone to carry his seed and the object of lust and sexual pleasure. God saw her, and I want to celebrate tonight the fact that God sees us, not as threats, but God sees us. Not as criminals, but God sees us. Not as people who have no rights or have no opinions. God sees us. Not as those who are weak and powerless. God sees us. Is there anybody that's grateful tonight that despite what name you may have been called, God sees you? Not God sees the troubles that you have, but God sees you. Not that God sees the struggle, more than God seeing the struggles you have, God sees you. She says, this is the God who sees me. And here's the crazy part. We're told that she is Egyptian. They didn't worship Jehovah. No, they were a polytheistic society. They had gods for everything, but she has rejected all of that. And she says, I serve a God who sees me. Do you know how valuable it is when somebody sees you? They see past your color. They see past your education. They see past your nappy hair. They see past your weave. They see past your breasts. They see past your behind, and they see the value in you. Tonight I'm grateful that I serve a God who sees me. I serve a God. Come on, somebody ought to praise him. I'm trying just to teach. I promise you, I'm not trying to preach. I promise you I'm trying to teach. But I serve a God who sees me. That when other folks see you through the lens that they preconceive about you, God sees me. While other people have prejudged you and placed their stuff on you, God sees me. While other people see me as being hostile and violent and a threat and a menace, God sees me. I just want y'all to think about that for just 1 second. That God sees. God don't see the food that you ate. He doesn't see the stuff that you smoked. He doesn't see the stuff that you drank. He doesn't see the mistakes of your past. God sees. God sees you. And not only does he see you, he still loves you. I know y'all may not be there, but I can admit there's some stuff that I see in me that's not lovable. But God loves me despite what he saw about me. God, because he made me. That's what he told Jeremiah. Before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you and I called you. Yeah, I knew you and I called you. I knew every lie you would tell. I knew every heart you'd break. I knew every sin you would commit. I knew every cuss before you knew how to cuss. But yet, I still knew you, and I called you, and I appointed you, and I loved you enough to die for you. God says, I'm sending you back for a season. But I see you. I see you. I see what you're going through. I see you. I see how difficult it's been. I see you. I see the struggles that you've had. I see you. And so tonight, I say to those of you who are on the feed or those of you that'll catch this later, you're struggling, but God sees you. You're doing the best you can, and God sees you. When folk throw your mistakes in your face, God sees you. When people try to remind you of your dark past, God sees you. When people try to discount you, God sees you. Tamika, when you try to tell your neighbor, don't let your dog poop in my yard, and she threatens to call the cops on you, God sees you. Ashley, when they judge you, God sees you. Angela, when they want to throw up their hands and be frustrated with you, God sees you. Miss Maxine, Miss Darling, when they talk about you, God sees you. Whoever else is on the feed that I can't see, Miss Gail, Miss Michelle, God sees. God sees you. And even if you don't have any children, God sees you. Even if you don't have a husband, God sees you. Even if you don't have a wife, God, I'm done. I'm done. God sees you. Hagar goes back. As we read the text, the abuse seems to stop. The mistreatment stops. And then at the right time, God releases her. It doesn't happen the way she wants to happen. But her and her child are free. Her and her child are loosed. Her and her child are let go. And I'm here to tell you today that God sees us and that our struggles are for a season. That our trials are for a season. That even this virus right now, this is for a season. That God has a plan that our eyes can't see. So here's my testimony tonight. You are the God that sees. And I trust you to see what I can't see. Not only do you see me, but I trust you to see the ways that I can't see. I trust you to see and to protect me in the midst of my storms. I thank you for seeing my situation. I thank you for seeing my need. Most of all, I thank you for seeing me.